of the main stakeholder groups that CSRD kind of pulls apart, are two main groups that they say there's the people who can affect or can be affected by your undertaking. So there's that the first group, affected stakeholders, the people you have potential actual impacts on. And then there's the group what they call the users of sustainability statements, primary users of your general purpose financial reporting. So there can be a lot of stakeholders still, from your investors to banks, to analysts, academics, civil society. So when you produce your information, they might use that. There are two key groups. You need to go out, engage with them, but there's a few key things also to consider that kind of a bit more mixed throughout those European standards and implementation guidance, and really key things I think that to touch upon there. The first one is like that, you can't always talk to every affected stakeholder. So credible proxies of subject matter experts are really important as well. Do you have any insights on that, Megan, about how would you generally use proxies in that sense, and how important are they?
Yeah, I mean, it's really helpful to engage a credible proxy if there is an instance where talking to someone or, contacting them might put them in danger, especially in instances where there's some sort of human rights risk, or there's a conflict area or something like that. But it's still incredibly important to understand that perspective and point of view. So where you can't speak with those people, finding that credible proxy or someone who can speak on their behalf, some sort of advocate, is really critical in getting that perspective that you might not get because you can't contact that individual or affected party.
Yeah, good point. And what we've seen as well, sometimes there are language barriers or groups of people that don't want to talk to you. There's some societies in which there's still strong kind of dividing lines between kind of males and females, and then only the men are allowed to speak as elders or representatives of the community, but you do want those female views as well. Like, how do you get them? So sometimes you have to work with proxies, or you have to really work with subject matter experts as well, where the community might tell you a lot about how water is polluted, but let's get some experts in and actually do the measurements and talk to them about like how that works. So you need to get a wide variety of views there. So that's a really good point. And I think you already touched a little bit about this on the second, about silent stakeholders. Sometimes there are groups that are, that's silent, that you can't engage with because of risks, or they can't speak with you. But there are also other potential groups like nature and future generations, groups that are, harder to engage with in that sense. So quite important to keep that in mind as well. Do you have any insights on that? Like, how do people deal with those groups? Like, how do you represent nature or future generations in that sense in doing stakeholder engagement?
And nature is an interesting one because ESRS has identified that specifically and called nature out as a silent stakeholder. And that's, one that they have specifically pointed out, that nature can't speak for itself. In instances like that, where, there is no proxy to really speak for nature, unless, you are engaging a, environmental expert or, of that nature. You can also supplement that with some research, potentially from credible sources. And I think that is a really helpful way to sort of bolster up that perspective, especially for nature. We do have scientific evidence out there. There's research, it's well documented, it's peer reviewed, it's credible sources that you can use to sort of supplement some of that information. I think that's a really helpful way to get some of that perspective where maybe you can't speak to that affected party if it's something like nature, which does not have a voice for itself. But I think it's a matter of just sort of thinking through, okay, I can't talk to this person or stakeholder group for whatever reason, and trying to identify, okay, well, is there something credible? Is there scientific research that can back this up and sort of help to give that data without actually speaking to or engaging with that person specifically?
I think that's a really important way of looking at it as well, that stakeholder engagement, yeah, ideally it's, it's dialogue and you interact with people, but sometimes you can't, but it can still be stakeholder engagement if you rely on particular pieces of research or reports or, data sets. Another key point is that what we see with CSRD is that it's really now making you look across your full value chain. So whereas, we've seen traditionally some companies kind of be more inclined to focus on their own operations and maybe not so much on the supply chain and downstream, it is now really set in stone. You have to look across that full value chain. And what that means is that it's also interesting to think about, and you touched upon this earlier a little bit, about that difference between internal and external stakeholders as well, that some companies, intrinsically look at their own operations, but that's really important as well to go far and wide there across that full value chain.